September 12, 2025, a quiet night on the Baltic coast. At 12:25 a.m., two enormous oil tankers belonging to a covert shadow fleet were anchored at the Primorsk terminal, preparing to load millions of barrels of crude. Everything seemed routine until, hundreds of kilometers to the south, operators at a Nebo-M radar installation saw an unusual pattern flicker across their screens. Over 70 faint radar echoes appeared, small, elusive, and fast. They were heading directly toward Russian airspace, spreading across nearly 1,000 kilometers. The first report reached the Leningrad Oblast Air Defense Command within minutes. When confirmation came from the 91N6E Big Bird radar network, sirens echoed through the corridors. The radar officers didn't yet know that they were witnessing one of the most complex and deceptive aerial operations ever conducted in the region. The plan behind that night's events had been set in motion months earlier in Kiev. The challenge was enormous: how to strike a heavily protected target nearly 1,000 kilometers away, inside one of the densest air defense zones in the world. Russia's Atupad anti-access area denial barrier around the Baltic region was a fortress overlapping radar coverage, S-400 missile divisions, and panzer gun batteries guarding every possible entry route. Conventional attacks were suicide. So the architects of the mission turned to an idea built on illusion, misdirection, and data overload. The strategy relied on tricking Russian radar systems into fighting ghosts. Dozens of decoy drones were programmed to mimic a large-scale assault, diverting the S-400s away from the actual strike group. Each false wave had a purpose: to force the defenders to waste missiles, to reveal radar positions, and to open corridors for the true attackers. The targets chosen for deception were spread across the Leningrad region, from Tosno and Volosovo to the outskirts of St. Petersburg. The Russians would soon find themselves chasing phantoms across their own skies. When the first formations appeared on radar, the Russian command responded exactly as expected. The long-range S-400 engagement radars locked on and fired, filling the sky with 48 N6 missiles. At lower levels, Panzer S-1 batteries created a storm of tracer fire from their twin 30mm cannons. From the ground, it looked like a flawless defense. Dozens of targets vanished from the screens, each marked as destroyed. In Godchina, a young lieutenant watched the last blip disappear from his monitor and calmly reported to command, "Sector clear. All targets neutralized." That report would become the foundation of a disastrous misjudgment. Because what had been shot down were not the real attackers, but decoys. The Ukrainian planners had sent over 70 drones in total, but only about half were intended to be destroyed. The others are smaller, quieter, more advanced, slipped through the chaos. Hidden within that second wave were the key assets: the extended-range UJ-26 bomber drones, each carrying a 40-kilogram armor-piercing warhead and modified with extra fuel tanks to fly more than 1,000 kilometers. Escorting them were Banshee-7 electronic warfare drones, built on the same long-range body but equipped with powerful jamming pods instead of explosives. Together, these two types formed a deadly partnership. The bombers were the blades, the Banshees were the smoke. The decoys, a cheap AQ-400 Sith drones made from lightweight plywood, were the bait. Mass-produced, simple, and nearly invisible to radar, they could be built by the hundreds and sacrificed without hesitation. At exactly midnight, they launched from scattered fields and runways across Ukraine, flying in low at terrain level, following preloaded digital maps that guided them through river valleys and forest corridors. For hours, they flew in silence, engines humming beneath radar coverage. Some crashed along the way, lost to terrain or software failure, but it didn't matter. Enough survived to reach the target zone. Once they crossed into Russian airspace, everything changed. The mission switched from stealth to survival. The Banshees began transmitting interference patterns, confusing radar frequencies, and feeding false returns to Russian systems. The massive wave appeared on screens as a chaotic cloud of threats, each moving at unpredictable speeds and altitudes. The S-400 batteries automatically prioritized what their software identified as the greatest danger at the larger, noisier decoys flying towards St. Petersburg. That was precisely what the attackers wanted. Dozens of Russian missiles soared skyward, detonating in dazzling bursts above the forests and lakes of the Leningrad Oblast. Wooden debris rained down, the shattered remnants of decoys. Russian officers celebrated what they thought was a total interception. But every interception drew fire and attention away from the real strike path. Underneath the confusion, the bomber and Banshee drones continued their run, skimming treetops and power lines as they advanced toward the coast. One Panzer battery near Volosovo briefly detected a real bomber drone and locked on. The operator's screen showed telemetry data of altitude, speed, vector. He prepared to fire, but a nearby Banshee detected his radar's frequency and unleashed a blast of electronic noise so strong that his entire display went white. The lock vanished. The cannons fired blindly into the night, missing completely. The Ukrainian drone slipped past, its signal disappearing into the black horizon. All across the region, this dance of radar and countermeasure played out again and again. The Russian air defense did its job perfectly, even up against an enemy that had already calculated its every move. By the time dawn began to glow faintly over the Baltic, the defenders thought they had crushed a massive attack. In reality, the decisive strike force, the 7 Ju-26 bomber drones, was still flying, undetected, toward the Primorsk oil port. In the days that followed, satellite photographs painted a new geography of fire. What once appeared as an industrial port now looked like a charred grid of twisted metal and oil-soaked concrete. The smoke plume from Primorsk was visible for nearly 100 kilometers over the Baltic, spreading like a bruise across the sky. Yet the silence from official channels was deafening. Statements were brief, clinical, and almost sterile. Fire contained, no casualties, exports unaffected. But those who monitored tanker traffic saw the truth written in ICE data. Dozens of ships halted mid-route, anchor icons frozen in place, their manifests quietly cancelled. At the same time, digital forensics teams began dissecting the wreckage of downed drones across Leningrad Oblast. Circuit boards were recovered, scorched but intact. Embedded within them, analysts found navigation units using hybrid civilian-military algorithms, a fusion of commercial GPS, GLONASS, and encrypted waypoints. Even more intriguing was the discovery of adaptive flight software designed to change altitude when jammed, allowing the drones to duck below radar sweeps and then rise again to reacquire signal. This wasn't improvisation, it was iterative design to learning in motion. By midweek, open-source trackers confirmed what state media avoided: oil exports through Primorsk had fallen by over 70%. Refineries dependent on those shipments began to stockpile, and Moscow's Ministry of Energy shifted routes to Ust-Luga and Novorossiysk. Insurance premiums for tankers in the Baltic corridor spiked, forcing operators to weigh profit against risk. What had begun as a single coordinated strike was now rippling into the global energy chain, an invisible aftershock that reached trading floors from Rotterdam to Singapore. In think tanks and military circles, the event ignited debate. Some called it a new blueprint for precision asymmetry, how small actors, armed with algorithms and patience, could bend industrial giants. Others warned of the reverse, that every drone downed, every radar blinded, would now feed into counter-design, an accelerating cycle of adaptation. The battlefield was no longer a physical line, it was an ecosystem of data, jammers, and code. By the 10th day, environmental satellites recorded massive oil sheens drifting along the Gulf of Finland. Cleanup vessels moved in, but the damage was ecological as much as strategic. Fisheries halted operations, local authorities banned coastal navigation. The Baltic, usually calm, now mirrored a world learning that wars could wound not only nations, but seas themselves. And then came the quiet escalation, and not of missiles, but of silence. The absence of official footage, the deletion of satellite imagery from public archives, the narrowing of access. Analysts compared the blackout to a digital fog of war, a curtain pulled over a theater still smoldering. Yet fragments leaked out, handheld videos of flaming tankers, intercepted radio chatter of confused air defense crews, messages from port workers whispering about secondary explosions in submerged pipelines. What lingered was not only destruction, but uncertainty, the sense that this operation had rewritten a rulebook few had even read. For every drone that fell, another prototype was already being tested. For every radar blinded, a new frequency-hopping countermeasure was being coded. Strategists began to speak of cognitive warfare, not attacks on metal or flesh, but on perception itself. If a defender could no longer trust what their sensors displayed, how could they act with certainty? Primorsk became more than a battlefield, it became a case study in how modern war feeds on doubt, using misdirection as both shield and sword. As autumn advanced over the Baltic, the port smoldered quietly under gray skies. Scavengers sifted through wreckage, rescuers pumped black water from flooded compartments, and the world's attention drifted to new crises. But in the dim light of that burned terminal, a question remained unanswered. Was this the end of a single night's operation, or the beginning of a new doctrine, one where distance no longer grants safety, and the smallest drone can shape the fate of empires?